Hello, welcome to Archaic Reader. I'm your reader, Adam Jones. We are going to be reading a short story by H.S. Caswell named Emma Ashton. It was a sad day for Emma Ashton when, with her widowed mother, she turned from her father's new-made grave and again entered their desolate home. None but those who have experienced a like sorrow can fully understand their grief as they entered their now lonely home, where a short time since they had been so happy. But the ways of Providence are, to our feeble vision, often dark and incomprehensible, and the only way by which we can reconcile ourselves to many trials which we are called to endure is by remembering that there is a need be for every sorrow which falls to our lot in the journey of life. Emma was an only child and had been the idol of her father's heart, and no marvel if the world to her looked dark and dreary when he was removed by death. Added to the grief occasioned by their bereavement, the mother and daughter had yet another cause for anxiety and disquietude, for the home where they had dwelt for so many years in the enjoyment of uninterrupted happiness was now no longer theirs. Since quite a young man, Mr. Ashton had held the position of overseer in a large manufactory in the village of W. Owing to his sober and industrious habits, he had saved money sufficient to enable him, at the period of his marriage, to purchase a neat and tasteful home, to which he removed with his young wife. He still continued his industry, and began in a small way to accumulate money, when, unfortunately, he was persuaded by one whom he thought a friend to sign bank notes with him to a large amount, but ere the notes became due, the man he had obliged left the country, and he was unable to gain any trace of him, and was soon called upon to meet the claim. Bank notes must be paid, and to raise money to meet the claim he was forced to mortgage his house for nearly its full value. His health failed, and for 2 years previous to his death he was unable to attend to his business. The term of the mortgage was 5 years, which time expired soon after his death. During the few last weeks of his life, his mind was very much disturbed regarding the destitute condition in which he must leave his beloved wife and daughter, for he was too well acquainted with the man who held the claim to expect any lenity to his family when it should become due, and he was sensible that the hour of his own death was fast approaching. His wife tried to cheer him by hopeful words, saying, "Should it please our Heavenly Father to remove you, fear not that he will fail to care for the fatherless and widow." A short time before his death a sweet peace and hopeful trust settled over his spirit, and the religion he had sought in health afforded him a firm support in the hour of death. When all was over and the mother and daughter found themselves left alone, their fortitude well nigh forsook them, and they felt almost like yielding to a hopeless sorrow. Emma was at this time but 15 years of age, possessed of much personal beauty, and also a very amiable and affectionate disposition. Since the age of 6 years she had attended school, and made rapid progress in her various studies till the sad period of her father's death. As Mr. Ashton had foreseen, Mr. Tompkins, the man who held the mortgage, soon called upon the widow, informing her that the time had already expired, and unless she found herself able to meet the claim, her dwelling was legally his property. But, as a great favor, he granted her permission to occupy the house till she could make some arrangement concerning the future, giving her, however, distinctly to understand that he wished to take possession as soon as she could find another home. Mrs. Ashton thanked him for the consideration he had shown her, little as it was, telling him she would as soon as possible seek another home, however humble it might be, and Mr. Tompkins departed with a polite bow and a bland smile upon his countenance, well pleased that he had got the matter settled with so little difficulty. I presume he never once paused to think of the grief-stricken widow and her fatherless daughter, whom he was about to render homeless. Money had so long been his idol that tender and benevolent emotions were well nigh extinguished in his world-hardened heart. For a long time after Mr. Tompkins left the house, Miss Ashton remained in deep thought. There are, dear reader, dark periods in the lives of most of us, when, turn which way we will, we find ourselves surrounded as by a thick hedge, with difficulties and troubles from which we see no escape. At such periods it is good for us to call to mind the fact that the darkest cloud often has a silver lining, and that if we discharged to the best of our ability our duties for the time being, the cloud, sooner or later, will be reversed and display its bright side to our troubled view. The time had now arrived when Mrs. Ashton must come to some decision regarding the future. She had no friends to whom she could turn for aid or counsel in this season of trial. When quite young, she had emigrated from England with her parents and one sister and settled in eastern Canada. About the time of her marriage and removal to W, her parents, with her sister, removed to one of the western states, and it may be the knowledge that she must rely solely upon herself enabled her to meet her trials with more fortitude than might have been expected. Some 50 miles from W was the large and thriving village of Rockford, and thither Miss Ashton at length decided to remove. One reason for this decision was the excellent institution for the education of the young ladies, which was there located. She was very anxious that her daughter should obtain a good education, but was sorely puzzled as to raising the money needful for defraying her expenses. There were a few debts due her husband at the time of his death. These she collected with little difficulty. Their dwelling had been handsomely furnished, and she decided to sell the furniture, as she could easily, upon their arrival at Rockford, purchase what articles were necessary for furnishing their new home, which must, of necessity, be humble. One article she felt they must retain if possible, and that was the piano given her by her father at the period of her marriage. She did at first entertain the idea of parting with it, thinking how far the money it would bring would go in defraying the expenses attendant upon Emma's education, but upon second consideration she resolved that they would not part with her father's parting gift to her unless compelled to do so by actual want. And so when their old home was broken up, the piano was carefully packed and forwarded to Rockford. The home where they had resided so long was very dear to them, and it would have grieved them to leave it at any time, but to leave at the glad season of spring, when the trees which shaded their dwelling were beginning to put forth their leaves, and the flowers which adorned their garden were bursting into bloom, seemed to them doubly sad. But their preparations for removal were finally completed, and they left their home, followed by the good wishes of many who had long known and loved them. Upon their arrival at Rockford, Miss Ashton hired a cheap tenement in a respectable locality, which she furnished in a plain but decent manner. When they became settled in their new home, they had still in hand money sufficient to secure them from immediate want, but as Miss Ashton wished Emma to enter at once upon her studies, she was very anxious to devise some means of earning money to meet necessary expenses. There was one family residing in Rockford with whom Miss Ashton had several years before been intimately acquainted. Their name was LeBaron, and they had at one time resided in the same village with the Ashtons. Mr. LeBaron had opened a store upon removing to Rockford. The world had smiled upon him, and he was now considered one of the most wealthy and influential men in the village. It has been often said that prosperity hardens the heart of man, but if such is the case in general, Mr. LeBaron proved an exception to the general rule. He had heard with much sorrow of the death of Mr. Ashton, and also of the other misfortunes which had overtaken the family, and no sooner did he learn of the arrival of the widow and daughter in Rockford than, accompanied by his wife, he hastened to call upon them to renew their former acquaintance, and in a delicate and considerate manner to inquire if he could assist them in any way. Miss Ashton thanked them for their kindness, saying that although in no immediate need of assistance, yet she would be very thankful if they would assist her in obtaining employment. "If such is the case," replied Mrs. LeBaron, "I can easily secure you employment, as I am acquainted with many ladies who give out work, and will gladly use my influence in your favor." "You will confer a favor upon me by so doing," replied Mrs. Ashton, "for I must rely upon my labor for a support for the future." Through the influence of these kind friends, Mrs. Ashton soon obtained an abundant supply of work, and when she became somewhat acquainted with the people of Rockford, her gentle and unobtrusive manner gained her many warm friends. And this is the end of part 1. Stay tuned tomorrow for part 2, or in all likelihood, no one's listening to these, so you can go ahead and just click on the next one. Click on my channel. You'll be able to, like, part 2 will be up by the time you hear this. So, yeah, like and subscribe if you want. I'm not gonna beg. You know the deal. You don't have to hit the bell, though. I mean, like, come on, like, I'm here. You want to listen to some short stories? I'll see you tomorrow.